Hello again. Hopefully, sorry, I was trying a new thing where I was going to connect to the Ethernet of my house, but I don't think that worked. So we're just back to Wi-Fi right now. I'm going to get my cake out of the oven because I think it's time. I don't know if you can see anything or if it's just this big bottle of water in the way, but I'm going to test it. Oh, she looks beautiful. She's supposed to spring back, and she's not really springing back. I'm going to give her 3 more minutes. And then she has to come out, and then it's over for her. Okay, hope 2 of you seem to have found your way back. Sorry for the disturbance. My Ethernet cable said no thank you. So we're just back on Wi-Fi, and hopefully that all works out. Yes, I'm in a new location. It's because my cake is still in the oven. I burnt myself for it already, etc., etc. Okay, so with 3 minutes left, so sorry everybody. With 3 minutes left, we're gonna, I don't even, like, should I start and have to be interrupted in 2 minutes? Who knows? Yeah, who knows what we'll just talk about what happened yesterday. So yesterday in the book, was that when they went to? Yes, they went to the van der Luydens. And Newland was like, no, it was Newland and Mrs. Archer. They went to the van der Luydens. Mrs. Archer like tried to artfully be like, oh my God, this sad tale of woe. And the van der Luydens seemed to be okay with it. They were on board, and they went and they invited Ellen Olenska to a dinner at their place, which is very important. Big news. Van der Luydens are New York royalty. So that's all well and good. Somebody said something about a sonambula, which we don't know what is, but we're going with it anyways. So let's do this for however many 2 minutes we have left on my cake, at which point it must come out. Okay. The Age of Innocence, Chapter 8. It was generally agreed in New York that the Countess Olenska had lost her looks. She had appeared there first in Newland Archer's boyhood as a brilliantly pretty little girl of 9 or 10, of whom people said that she ought to be painted. Her parents had been continental wanderers, and after a roaming babyhood, she had lost them both, and been taken in charge by her aunt, Medora Manson, also a wanderer, who was herself returning to New York to settle down. Poor Medora, repeatedly widowed, was always coming home to settle down, each time in a less expensive house, and bringing with her a new husband or an adopted child. But after a few months, she invariably parted from her husband or quarreled with her ward, and, having got rid of her house at a loss, set out again on her wanderings. As her mother had been a Rushworth, and her last unhappy marriage had linked her to one of the crazy Shivers, New York looked indulgently. There we go. It's time. I'm going to go get my cake. Okay. We turn off the timer. We put on our gloves so we don't burn ourselves. Okay, hello. Oh, you're heavy. Okay. Just smells good. She springs back enough to the touch. Okay, I'm going to turn off the oven. And then you guys get to watch the really fun part. I'm going to shift this for you so you can hopefully see the whole ordeal. If I move this back. You're supposed to immediately flip it upside down onto the neck of a bottle. So I'm hoping that this bottle is enough, and it doesn't feel right to me, but okay. I guess this is fine. I guess that's how I feel like that's not right, you know? Apparently this is what it wants. This is what the book told me to do.
Is it gonna plop out of it?
I don't know. I'm kind of nervous. But I think this is holding it in. It's like it has I'll push it back far enough that you can like sort of see the cake and me during the reading, which I think is what we really want. I can like hear it making noise, which is making me really nervous. I'm stressed. It's fine. It's great. It's great. It's cool. It's just gonna be there. It's just gonna be there chilling. And we'll be here also chilling. Okay. Let's go back to Medora Manson. Where was I? Let's see. Okay. New York looked indulgently on her eccentricities, but when she returned with her little orphan niece, whose parents had been popular in spite of their regrettable taste for travel, people thought it a pity that the pretty child should be in such hands. Everyone was disposed to be kind to little Ellen Mingott, though her dusky red cheeks and tight curls gave her an air of gaiety that seemed unsuitable in a child who should have still been in black for her parents. It was one of the misguided Medora's many peculiarities to flout an unalterable rules that regulated American mourning. And when she stepped from the steamer, her family were scandalized to see that the crepe veil she wore for her own brother was 7 inches shorter than those of her sisters-in-law, while little Ellen was in crimson merino and amber beads, like a gypsy foundling. That's of her time. But New York had been so long resigned itself to Medora that only a few old ladies shook their heads over Ellen's gaudy clothes, while her other relations fell under the charm of her high color and high spirits. She was a fearless and familiar little thing, who asked disconcerting questions, made precocious comments, and possessed outlandish arts, such as dancing a Spanish shawl dance and singing Neapolitan love songs to a guitar. Under the direction of her aunt, whose real name was Mrs. Thorley Shivers, but who, having received a papal title, had resumed her first husband's patronymic and called herself the Marchioness Manson, because in Italy she could turn into a Manzoni. The little girl had received an expensive but incoherent education, which included drawing from the model, a thing never dreamed of before, and playing the piano in quintets with professional musicians. Of course, no good could come of this, and when a few years later poor Shivers finally died in a madhouse, his widow, draped in strange weeds, again pulled up stakes and departed with Ellen, who had grown into a tall, bony girl with conspicuous eyes. For some time, no more was heard of them, and then came news of Ellen's marriage to an immensely rich Polish nobleman of legendary fame, whom she had met at a ball in the Tuileries, and who was said to have princely establishments in Paris, Nice, and Florence, a yacht oh my god, a yacht at Cowes, and many square miles of shooting in Transylvania. She disappeared in a kind of sulphurous apotheosis. And when a few years later Medora again came back to New York, subdued, impoverished, and mourning a third husband, and in quest of a still smaller house, people wondered that her rich niece had not been able to do something for her. Then came the news that Ellen's own marriage had ended in disaster, and that she was herself returning home to seek rest and oblivion among her kinsfolk. These things passed through Newland Archer's mind a week later as he watched the Countess Olenska enter the van der Luyden drawing room on the evening of the momentous dinner. The occasion was a solemn one, and he wondered a little nervously how she would carry it off. She came rather late, one hand still ungloved and fastening a bracelet about her wrist. Yet she entered without any appearance of haste or embarrassment the drawing room in which New York's most chosen company was somewhat awfully assembled. In the middle of the room she paused, looking about her with a grave mouth and smiling eyes. And in that instant Newland Archer rejected the general verdict on her looks. It was true that her early radiance was gone. The red cheeks had paled, she was thin, worn, a little older looking than her age, which must have nearly been 30. But there was about her the mysterious authority of beauty, a sureness in the carriage of the head, the movement of the eyes, which, without being in the least theatrical, struck his as highly trained and full of conscious power. Oh my God, that's cool. I want to be full of conscious power. Um, at the same time, she was simpler in manner than most of the ladies present, and many people, as he heard afterwards from Janie, were disappointed that her appearance was not more stylish, for stylish was what New York most valued. It was, perhaps, Archer reflected, because her early vivacity had disappeared, because she was so quiet in her movements, her voice, and in the tones of her uh, and the tones of her low-pitched voice. New York had expected something a good deal more resonant in a young woman with such a history. The dinner was a somewhat formidable business. Dining with the Vanderludens was at best no light matter, and dining there with Duke, who was their cousin, was almost a religious solemnity. It pleased Archer to think that only an old New Yorker could perceive the shade of difference to New York between being merely a duke and being the Vanderludens' duke. New York took stray noblemen calmly, and even, except in the Struthers' set, with a certain distrustful hauteur. But when they presented such credentials as these, they were received with an old-fashioned cordiality that they would have been greatly mistaken in ascribing solely to their standing in Debrett. It was for such distinctions, that the young man cherished his old New York even when he smiled at it. The Vanderludens had done their best to emphasize the importance of the occasion. The Dulac Severs and the Trevenna George II plate were out. So was the Vanderluden Lowestoft East India Company and the Dagonet Crown Derby. Mrs. Vanderluden looked more than ever like a Cabanel, and Mrs. Archer, in her grandmother's seed pearls and emeralds, reminded her son of an Isabey miniature. All the ladies had on their handsomest jewels, but it was a characteristic of the house and the occasion that these were mostly in rather heavy old-fashioned settings, and old Mrs. Lanning, who had been persuaded to come, actually wore her mother's cameos and a Spanish blonde shawl. The Countess Olenska was the only young woman at the dinner, yet, as Archer scanned the smooth, plump, elderly faces between their diamond necklaces and towering ostrich feathers, they struck him as curiously immature compared with hers. It frightened him to think what must have gone into It frightened him to think what must have gone to the making of her eyes. I'm shook. Wow. The Duke of St. Austri, who sat at his hostess's right, was naturally the chief figure of the evening. But if the Countess Olenska was less conspicuous than had been hoped, the Duke was almost invisible. Being a well-bred man, he had not, like another recent ducal visitor, come to the dinner in a shooting jacket, but his evening clothes were so shabby and baggy, and he wore them with such an air of their being homespun that, with his stooping way of sitting and the vast beard spreading over his shirt front, he hardly gave the appearance of being in dinner attire. He was short, round-shouldered, sunburned, with a thick nose, small eyes, and a sociable smile. But he seldom spoke, and when he did, it was in such low tones that, despite the frequent silences of expectation about the table, his remarks were lost to all but his neighbors. When the men joined the ladies after dinner, the Duke went straight up to the Countess Olenska, and they sat down in a corner and plunged into animated talk. Neither seemed aware that the Duke should first have paid his respects to Mrs. Lovell Mingott and Mrs. Headley Shivers, and the Countess, having conversed with the amiable hypochondriac, Mr. Urban Dagonet of Washington Square, who, in order to have the pleasure of meeting her, had broken through his fixed rule of not dining out between January and April. The two chatted together for nearly 20 minutes. Then the Countess rose, and walking alone across the wide drawing room, sat down at Newland Archer's side. It was not the custom in New York drawing rooms for a lady to get up and walk away from one gentleman in order to seek the company of another. Etiquette required that she should wait, immovable as an idol, while the men who wished to converse with her succeeded each other at her side. But the Countess was apparently unaware of having broken any rule. She sat at a perfect ease in a corner of the sofa beside Archer, and looked at him with the kindest eyes. I want you to talk to me about May, she said. Instead of answering her, he asked, You knew the Duke before? Oh, yes. We used to see him every winter at Nice. He's very fond of gambling. He used to come to the house a great deal. She said it in the simplest manner, as if she had said, "He's fond of wildflowers." And after a moment, she added candidly, "I think he's the dullest man I ever met." This pleased her companion so much that he forgot the slight shock her previous remark had caused him. It was undeniably exciting to meet a lady who found the van der Luden's Duke dull, and dared to utter the opinion. He longed to question her, to hear more about the life of which her careless words had given him so illuminating a glimpse. But he feared to touch on distressing memories, and before he could think of anything to say, she strayed back to her original subject. Oh man, Newland is a goner, and so am I. Um, May is a darling. I've seen no young girl in New York so handsome and so intelligent. Are you very much in love with her? Newland Archer reddened and laughed, as much as a man can be. She continued to consider him thoughtfully, as if not to miss any shade of meaning in what he said. Do you think, then, there is a limit? To being in love? If there is, I haven't found it. She glowed with sympathy. Ah, it's really and truly a romance? The most romantic of romances. How delightful! And you found it out all for yourself. It was not in the least arranged for you? Archer looked at her incredulously. Have you forgotten, he asked with a smile, that in our country we don't allow our marriages to be arranged for us? A dusky blush rose to her cheek, and he instantly regretted his words. Yes, she answered. I'd forgotten. You must forgive me if I sometimes make these mistakes. I don't always remember that everything here is good that was bad where I've come from. She looked down at her Viennese fan of eagle feathers, and he saw that her lips trembled. I'm so sorry, he said impulsively, but you are among friends here, you know. Yes, I know. Wherever I go, I have that feeling. That's why I came home. I want to forget everything else, to become a complete American again, like the Mingotts and Wellens, and you and your delightful mother, and all the other good people here tonight. Here's May arriving, and you will want to hurry away to her, she added without moving, and her eyes turned back from the door to rest on the young man's face. The drawing rooms were beginning to fill with after-dinner guests, and following Madame Olenska's glance, Archer saw May Welland entering with her mother. In her dress of white and silver, with a wreath of silver blossoms in her hair, the tall girl looked like a Diana just alight from the chase. Oh, said Archer, I have so many rivals. You see, she's already surrounded. There's the Duke being introduced. Then stay with me a little longer, Madame Olenska said in a low tone, just touching his knee with her plumed fan. It was the lightest touch, but it thrilled him like a caress. Yes, let me stay, he answered in the same tone, hardly knowing what he said. But just then Mr. van der Luyden came up, followed by old Mr. Urban Dagonet. The Countess greeted them with her grave smile, and Archer, feeling his host's admonitory glance on him, rose and surrendered his seat. Madame Olenska held out her hand as if to bid him goodbye. Tomorrow, then, after 5, I shall expect you, she said, and then turned back to make room for Mr. Dagonet. Tomorrow, Archer heard himself repeating, though there had been no engagement, and during their talk she had given him no hint that she wished to see him again. As he moved away, he saw Lawrence Lefferts, tall and resplendent, leading his wife up to be introduced, and heard Gertrude Lefferts say, as she beamed on the Countess with her large, unperceiving smile, "But I think we used to go to dancing school together when we were children." Behind her, waiting their turn to name themselves to the Countess, Archer noticed a number of the recalcitrant couples who had declined to meet her at Mrs. Lovell Mingott's. As Mrs. Archer remarked, when the van der Luydens choose, they know how to give a lesson. The wonder was that they chose so seldom. The young man felt a touch on his arm and saw Mrs. van der Luyden looking down on him from the pure eminence of black velvet and the family diamonds. It was so good of you, dear Newland, to devote yourself so unselfishly to Madame Olenska. I told your cousin Henry he must really come to the rescue. He was aware of smiling at her vaguely, and she added, as if condescending to his natural shyness, I've never seen May looking lovelier. The Duke thinks her the handsomest girl in the room. And that is the end of chapter 8. I had to really pause to read. I've lost my bookmark. Oh, there it is. Haha, I was just in front of the book. That was really cool. Newland's gonna get so sad. It's gonna be sad. Cake stayed in the tin. Looks good. I think it has to cool like that because otherwise it's gonna sink down on itself. So it needs to hang like a bat in the cake. And I kind of want to sniff it. I'm sorry. Okay, I will do it. I'll contain myself to do it after in the privacy of my own home. All right. So that was the chapter for today. I hope you all are well. It took us a while, but I mean, of course it did. I had to take out a cake in the middle of the event. So with that, I will see you all here tomorrow. Hopefully, I will finally tell you what my schedule is upcoming because it's been changing because my school is difficult. How do you eat cake? Put head underneath. Eventually this part comes off and there's another, it's a removable cake tin. So there's two parts. There's the bottom and the center and then the outside. So I will hopefully be able to pull the outside up and then take the bottom and center off. And the bottom is currently on the top doing its due diligence. So I will see you all here tomorrow. Thank you for listening. Thank you for putting up with me having to take my cake out of the oven halfway through. Hope you're well. Hope you're safe. See you all soon. Goodbye.